Most people today live on autopilot. Wake up, rush, work, consume, sleep. Everything is timed, everything designed to function like a machine that never stops. But have you ever stopped to think why so many people feel an emptiness that nothing seems to fill? Why, even with access to so much technology, entertainment, achievements, and information, it still feels like something essential is missing? The ancients knew what it was. They didn't see life as something separate from the sacred. In ancient Egypt, for example, there wasn't even a word for religion. And that wasn't because they lacked faith, but because everything was considered divine. The sky, the body, nature, death, silence, movement. Everything was part of the same sacred dance. There was no separation between the spiritual and the everyday. Today, that awareness has been lost. We created boxes, one for work, another for leisure, another for the sacred, as if the divine could only be accessed on Sundays or in specific moments, as if it were something outside of us, restricted to distant rituals or a physical place called a temple. But what the ancients knew, and what the great sages have always tried to remind us, is that life itself is a temple. Every gesture, every breath, every glance is an opportunity to reconnect with the mystery that lives within us. When we forget that, the feeling of disconnection is born. The soul starts to scream, but we don't understand it. We try to fill the gap with consumption, excess, speed, but none of that heals, because what's missing isn't outside, it's inside. The call to reclaim a sacred view of existence isn't something mystical or far away. It's a shift in perception. It's about stopping treating life like a burden and starting to see it for what it really is. A school, a laboratory, an altar. That's the real alchemy, transforming the way you see things, realizing that the simple fact of being alive is already a miracle. And when you start living with that awareness, everything changes. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. The simple becomes deep, and you realize you're not here just to survive, but to awaken. Few names have carried as much mystery and reverence through the millennia as Hermes Trismegistus. Called Thrice Great, his title is not an embellishment, but a code, a symbol of someone who went through 3 great spiritual initiations and awakened to levels that most people can't even imagine exist. Hermes was not seen as just a man. He was regarded by the ancient Egyptians and by the Hermetic masters as a being who united the human and the divine. Not in a fantastical, mystical sense, but as someone who managed to touch the essence of existence through self-knowledge. Hermes was a bridge between worlds, between matter and spirit, between the visible and the invisible. His teachings did not come from theory, but from direct experience with the mysteries of the universe. He understood the laws that govern creation, the workings of the mind, the cycle of energies, and the invisible architecture of reality. And more than understanding it, he taught how to access all of this from within ourselves. The triple initiation is a metaphor for the transformation of a human being into a true channel of universal wisdom. The first level is the awakening of the mind, when the seeker begins to realize that there is something beyond the surface of things. The second is the awakening of the heart, when they begin to live in alignment with that truth, bringing intention, action, and awareness into harmony. The third is the awakening of the spirit, when they transcend the limited identity and recognize themselves as a living part of the whole. Hermes represents this state of being, and what's most impressive is that his teachings have survived to this day. They are recorded in fragments, in coded texts, in works like the Emerald Tablet and the Corpus Hermeticum. But they also echo through all traditions that speak of the power of self-knowledge as the path to truth. If this knowledge is reaching you now, it's not by chance. This kind of wisdom doesn't appear in prime time. It doesn't go viral without purpose. It reveals itself to those who are ready. And the simple fact that you are here reading this is a sign that something inside you has already begun to awaken. The hidden knowledge. And that is precisely why this kind of wisdom has always been guarded so carefully. The ancients knew that not everyone was ready. That knowledge, when given before its time, could be distorted, trivialized, or even cause imbalance. The Hermetic Laws were seen as a powerful, sacred force, and for that very reason, they required spiritual maturity. They were not just philosophical ideas, but keys to access dimensions of reality that could completely transform those who received them. That's why they were passed down only from mouth to ear in an intimate process between priest and disciple. It was an oral tradition protected for centuries. This knowledge couldn't fall into the wrong hands, because at that time it was understood that an unprepared mind could use these laws for manipulation, ego, or destruction. An immature mind, when coming into contact with power without having gone through the purification of character, runs the risk of becoming even more lost. The knowledge wasn't hidden out of vanity, but for protection. Protection of the wisdom itself and protection of those not yet ready for it. The priests were aware that this wisdom activated deep parts of human consciousness, potentially awakening gifts, perceptions, and even abilities. But all of that required responsibility. That's why access was granted only after trials, silences, observations, and practices. It was a journey, a rite of passage. Later, this same knowledge came to be persecuted. During the rise of institutionalized religious thought in Europe, Hermeticism was considered heretical, pagan, dangerous. The alchemists began to hide, using metaphors, symbols, and coded language to continue their studies in secret. Many pretended they were only dealing with metals and chemical formulas, but what they were really trying to transform was the human being. That was the true alchemy, the one that operates in consciousness, the one that transmutes lead into gold, not literal lead, but the lead of ignorance into the gold of wisdom. And that is why knowledge about these laws remained underground for so long, because those who controlled society did not want conscious, free, awakened individuals. It was easier to govern a sleeping humanity than to face empowered souls. The simple fact that this content is in front of you at this moment is a clear sign that times are changing. The veil that once separated the visible from the invisible is being lifted. What was once forbidden or considered heresy is now being rediscovered with new eyes. And that's not a coincidence. Collective consciousness is expanding, and as always happens when humanity enters periods of transition, the alchemists begin to reappear. Not with robes, laboratories, or secret rituals, but with presence, clarity, and purpose. They are not here to impress. They are here to remind. And when we look at the origin of this wisdom, all paths lead us to one place, Egypt, but not the Egypt of travel photos or history books. We're talking about an Egypt invisible to ordinary eyes, an Egypt vibrating on another frequency, a true portal between worlds. There, every temple, every symbol, every carved stone carried a code. Nothing was random, nothing was merely decorative. What today is seen as mythology was, in truth, spiritual language. The Egyptian civilization didn't appear out of nowhere. It was born already complete, already structured, as if it had received a direct impulse from a higher intelligence. And maybe it really did. The architecture of the pyramids, the astronomical alignment of the temples, the mastery of golden proportions, all of it points to a level of consciousness far beyond what we usually associate with antiquity. Hermes Trismegistus himself, whom many consider more of an archetype than a historical figure, is said to have lived there among priests and initiates, teaching the foundations of alchemy, astrology, and the laws of the universe. Egypt became the cradle of alchemy, astrology, sacred symbolism, and Hermetic philosophy. And even millennia later, that land still carries that vibration. In medieval Europe, any wise man, magician, or scholar who demonstrated hidden knowledge was immediately associated with Egypt. They would say, "He came from Egypt," as a way of saying he had a connection to a mysterious and ancient knowledge, because Egypt carried that mark, not as an ordinary nation, but as a living symbol of spiritual connection. And perhaps nothing represents that mystery better than the pyramids. To this day, with all modern technology, no one can fully explain how they were built. How gigantic stone blocks, weighing tons, were stacked with such precision, without cement, without cracks, without error. And not only that, they are perfectly aligned with constellations, with Orion's belt, with the cycles of the sun and earth. All of it created by a civilization that supposedly had no advanced instruments. The pyramids continue to defy logic. They remain an enigma. And that's why, in Cairo, there is a phrase that locals proudly repeat. Man fears time, but time fears the pyramids, because they still stand untouched as silent guardians of a forgotten truth. While empires fell, religions changed, and governments disappeared, the pyramids remained. They are not just monuments, they are witnesses, they are portals. Death as a measure of the soul. And when we cross that symbolic portal that Egypt represents, we understand that even death there was lived as part of a deep spiritual process. There was no fear of death as we see today, no denial or rush to forget it. Death was seen as a crossing, a rite of passage, an evaluation of the soul. And this understanding is recorded in one of the oldest and most sacred texts of Egyptian civilization, the Book of the Dead. In it, there is a scene that is more than symbolic. It is an entire teaching condensed into an image. The heart of the deceased was placed on a scale, weighed against a feather. The feather represented Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul was considered pure enough to move forward, to access the higher realms. But if it was heavier, it was a sign that the person carried guilt, attachments, emotional weight that kept them tied to the density of earthly existence. This image is a powerful metaphor for inner alchemy, because it is not about external punishment, but a reflection of what was cultivated within during life. The Egyptians believed that true spiritual evolution depended on the lightness of being, a lightness born from detachment, honesty with oneself, and the pursuit of balance between thought, word, and action. To them, the heart was the center of consciousness. It was the heart, not the brain, that held the truth about who a person really was. And for that reason, at the time of death, it wasn't enough to have lived long. One had to have lived well, with intention, with purpose, with ethics. One had to have let go of everything that weighed them down: resentments, lies, ego, uncontrolled desires. Because in the moment of crossing, no one can carry baggage. This philosophy of life taught that true value was not in possessions, prestige, or material achievements, but in the state of the soul, in how much a person managed to remain whole, connected, lucid. In practice, this was a constant invitation to self-observation, to inner purification. Each day, a chance to make the heart lighter. And when we look at this through Hermetic eyes, we understand how much this view resonates with spiritual alchemy. Transmuting the lead of the ego into the gold of consciousness is, at its core, the same process. A silent, constant, deep work. Because only the one whose heart is light can access the higher levels of existence, and through that, walk among those who transform lead into gold. And when we understand that the lightness of the heart was the condition to cross the portals of death, we realize that this pursuit of soul elevation didn't originate from organized religions or later theological systems. It comes from much earlier, long before writing, philosophy, or sacred books. Even before language, there were clear signs that human beings were searching for something beyond the visible. Archaeological evidence found in ancient burials shows this clearly. Peoples considered primitive, already performed funeral rituals, cared for bodies with symbolic intention, placed objects beside the dead as if preparing the person for another journey. This reveals that spirituality was not something taught, but something felt. A natural, silent, ancestral impulse. From our first steps, humans looked to the sky with questions. We felt the sacred pulsing in nature, in birth, in death, in fire, in the night. There was an intuitive awareness that all of this had a greater meaning, and that's why some scholars prefer to call our species not only Homo sapiens, but Homo religiosus, because to think, to reason, to reflect, all of it came alongside the need to seek the invisible, to understand the mystery. Before we formed words, we were already forming altars. We already intuited that something sacred inhabited life, that the invisible was real, that existence had layers beyond what the eyes could see. And this awareness crossed cultures, continents, and centuries. Egyptians, Greeks, Hindus, indigenous peoples, all said in their own way that there is a link between man and the cosmos, and that this link can only be accessed within us. The effect of cosmic vision and the overview effect. And this silent memory pulsing within us becomes even more evident when we are exposed to the true vastness of the universe. Some astronauts have experienced this literally as they observed Earth from the outside, out in space. This phenomenon was named the overview effect, and it describes a profound shift in perception, almost always spiritual, that happens when a human being sees the planet from afar, suspended in the emptiness of the cosmos. They report that in that moment, everything changes. Borders disappear. Problems seem irrelevant. Wars, conflicts, political or religious disputes lose their meaning. Because there, floating in the face of infinite vastness, the human being realizes something that already exists inside but is almost never accessed. Unity, the interdependence of everything, the fragility and at the same time, the perfection of existence. This effect, which happens through the eyes of those who observe Earth from space, can also happen within us when we manage to silence the noise of daily life and look at life more deeply. It's a kind of spontaneous awakening, an intimate recognition that we are immersed in something much greater than we were taught to believe, and that our existence is not random or without purpose. This shift in perspective has such a strong impact because it breaks the illusion of separation. It reminds us that everything is connected, that we are part of a living, intelligent, and vibrant whole. And more than that, it puts us face to face with the truth that many of the worries we carry every day are artificial constructs, stories we were told, conditioning, distractions. When an astronaut returns to Earth after experiencing this expanded vision, they don't come back the same. Many report a deep desire to change their lives, to serve the planet, to find a new purpose, because something was activated. And that activation doesn't come from information, but from direct experience with truth. And that's exactly what happens when you begin to access this kind of wisdom. Maybe you haven't been to space, but the feeling of being stuck in a narrow, small world full of repetition and emptiness begins to dissolve, because your vision expands, because you begin to remember your true nature, because you realize the universe was never outside, it was always within. And the more this vision expands, the more you begin to realize something the ancients already knew, but the modern world insists on forgetting. The separation between you and the universe is only an illusion. The idea that we are isolated beings, disconnected from each other and from existence itself, is what the ancients called the heresy of separateness. That is the greatest lie we've been told, and perhaps the most dangerous one. The true initiate is the one who moves through that illusion. They stop identifying with the narrow image of the ego and begin to realize that they are not just an individual living in a body with a personal story. They feel they are part of something much greater, not as a pretty theory, but as a living reality. They recognize themselves as a cell of the divine, a conscious fragment of the whole. This awareness doesn't come from the outside. It is born from a state of presence so deep, so quiet, that the mind can no longer interfere. When that happens, something changes forever. The consciousness that was once trapped in the idea of separation begins to dissolve. And the more it dissolves, the more space opens for wisdom to flow. Wisdoms that are not in books, nor in words. Wisdoms that come as insights, visions, intuitions. Knowings that seem to come from somewhere else, but that were really just dormant within you, as if they were forgotten files now being accessed through a new frequency. The 7 Hermetic Laws and the Secrets of the Universe. And when that deep remembrance that the universe is within you begins to stabilize, The time comes to learn how to navigate it, because this invisible reality that now reveals itself before your eyes follows laws, subtle principles, but as real as gravity. And it was exactly these laws that Hermes Trismegistus recorded on the emerald tablet. 7 universal principles that govern everything that exists, from the macro to the micro, from the visible to the invisible. These laws are not dogmas or commandments. They are like the source code of creation. Understanding these laws is like receiving a map of how reality truly works behind appearances. Those who live ignoring these laws suffer, get frustrated, repeat cycles. Those who awaken to them begin to live differently, with more clarity, more awareness, more creative power. The first is the principle of mentalism. Everything is mind. The universe is mental. This means that everything that exists, before manifesting in matter, passed through a mental plane. Every reality begins as thought. Not just our desires or ideas, but the universe itself originated in the divine mind. And we, as fractals of that greater mind, also create through thought. All change begins within. Nothing exists in the world unless it first existed in the mind. Just look around you. Everything you see, that chair, that phone, this video, was first imagined. Someone thought it. Someone envisioned it. The mind is the matrix where everything is born. And that's why changing your thoughts changes your reality, because the mind is the starting point of everything. When you understand this, you stop wasting energy trying to change the outside world and start working with the true source of creation, your mental state. The second is the principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as within, so without. This law reveals that everything is interconnected. The macrocosm and the microcosm follow the same patterns. That's why your iris looks like a nebula, why your veins resemble tree roots, why the atom mirrors the solar system. The same intelligence is in everything. In practice, this law shows that the external reality is a reflection of your inner world. If there is chaos within, there will be chaos outside. If there is order within, the external responds. That's why so many transformations happen when you begin to look within. Because the world changes to the degree that you change. Nothing is separate. The third is the principle of vibration. Nothing is still. Everything vibrates. What you perceive as solid is actually a set of particles in motion. Everything is energy at different frequencies. You, objects, thoughts, emotions. Everything vibrates. And this has direct implications for life. What you feel, what you think, everything emits a frequency. And reality responds to your vibration, not your words. That's why there's no point in saying, "I want peace," if you're vibrating anxiety, or visualizing abundance while carrying guilt and scarcity. The universe responds to what you are, not to what you pretend to be. The fourth is the principle of polarity. Everything has 2 poles. Everything has its opposite. Hot and cold, light and shadow, love and fear. But they are not different things. They are the same energy in different degrees. Cold is the absence of heat. Hatred is a distortion of love. Darkness is the absence of light. This law teaches that opposites can be reconciled, that everything can be transmuted. You just need to shift the frequency. A negative thought can be elevated. Pain can be brought into the light. A crisis can reveal a blessing. That's why, when facing a challenge, ask yourself, what is the luminous side of this? Because it always exists. The fifth is the principle of rhythm. Everything rises and falls. Everything moves like the tides, like day and night, like the breath. Life is made of cycles. And understanding this is fundamental to living with more balance, because many people suffer from wanting to feel good all the time. They think happiness means always being up. But that's not real, because everything oscillates. And the secret is learning how to ride the movement. The more you swing too far to one side, the more the pendulum swings to the other. A weekend of excess, for example, is often followed by days of low energy. An overwhelming passion can turn into intense frustration. Wisdom lies in the middle, in the most neutral rhythm, not too much euphoria, not melancholy, just presence, clarity, centeredness. The sixth is the principle of cause and effect. Nothing happens by chance. Every action generates a reaction. Every choice has a consequence. This is the law that reminds us of responsibility. If you plant strawberries, you'll harvest strawberries. If you plant fear, you'll harvest limitations. Life responds to what you cultivate, and this applies to everything: health, relationships, money, emotional state. There's no use wishing for a result without planting the necessary causes. There's no use asking for clarity while continuing to feed distractions. There's no use wanting inner peace while living in the middle of conflict. Reality is fair. It gives back what you offer. The seventh is the principle of gender. Everything has its masculine and feminine aspect. This has nothing to do with sex or biological gender. It's about energy. Masculine energy is active, does, directs. Feminine energy is receptive, holds, intuits. We all have both. And balance is about knowing how to use them wisely. There are moments to act, decide, create. And there are moments to withdraw, feel, be still. A person who is too much in masculine energy can become aggressive, anxious, exhausted. A person who is only in feminine energy can become passive, lost, without the power to act. Harmony happens when there's a dance between the two. These are the 7 laws, the 7 principles that govern creation. They're not theoretical. They are at work all the time, even if you don't notice them. And that's why knowing about them changes everything. Because those who know these laws begin to act differently, begin to think like an alchemist, like a co-creator. The alchemist in training doesn't need magic formulas or mystical symbols. They need courage. Courage to look within, to face their own shadow, to let go of old roles, to release the illusion of control. And this is a process. It doesn't happen all at once. No one becomes thrice initiated overnight. But the call begins with one step. And that step begins when you begin to apply, when something inside you changes and you decide you're no longer going to repeat the same patterns, that you're no longer going to let fear dictate your actions, that you're no longer going to keep sleeping. That's the moment when alchemy begins. The exact moment you choose to live consciously. Maybe you're still at the beginning. Maybe you're full of doubts. But the fact that you've made it this far already says a lot, because knowledge doesn't show up by accident. It shows up when the soil is ready. And if this content has found you now, if this language is making sense, if something inside you is vibrating differently, then it's because the call has already been made. You don't need to be perfect or have everything figured out. You just need to be willing. Because true alchemists don't come with ceremonial robes or spiritual titles. They show up in silence, in the middle of ordinary life, while turning each moment into a step toward consciousness, while trading heaviness for lightness, resistance for surrender, fear for presence. The alchemists are arriving. And maybe, without even realizing it, you're already one of them. And before you go, there's something important waiting for you. And for those who want to go further, for those who want to truly dive into the mysteries of the 7 universal laws, I've left, in the first pinned comment, the book The Kybalion, one of the most powerful texts ever written about the Hermetic principles. It was a turning point for many people who began this journey. Now it's in your hands. See you on the other side.